Hello there, and welcome. This is episode 1 of what will become a multi-part series about the rise and fall of the Roman Republic from 753 BCE to 27 BCE. In this episode in particular, we'll be taking a good look at the Roman kingdom, which lasted from 753 BCE to 509 BCE. More specifically, we'll be taking a look at the foundation of the kingdom, the monarch, the Senate, the military, the religion, the fall of the kingdom, and the beginnings of the Roman Republic. Please sit back and I hope you enjoyed the video. According to legend, Rome was founded by Romulus, who was also the offspring of Mars, and Rhea Silvia, who was also the daughter of Numitor, who was the king of Alba Longa. Romulus also had a brother named Remus. However, in the argument that ensued between them over who would rule the city that would become Rome, because they were both twins, Romulus ended up killing his brother. Also, according to legend, Romulus was the first king of Rome and was responsible for establishing the government of the Roman kingdom, the city of Rome itself, and the army of the Roman kingdom. Unlike what it may seem at first glance, the Roman kingdom did not have a hereditary monarchy, but rather an elective monarchy, which might sound a bit odd considering the fact that most monarchies today are chosen by heritage, not elected into power. But we'll explain this. In order for someone to become a monarch, they first had to be nominated to the Senate by an interrex, who, upon the previous monarch's death, would be appointed by the Senate and would hold all powers of the king, but only for 5 days. During those 5 days, they would nominate candidates to become the next monarch, and if they got the Senate's approval, then they would become the next monarch. But in total, the Roman king at the time had multiple duties, and these are the following: the chief executive of Rome, the chief priest of Rome, the chief legislator of Rome, which was basically around making laws, the chief judge of Rome, the chief military commander of Rome. The title of holding military command was called imperium, and was the absolute ruler of the Roman state. In total, there were 7 kings of Rome, all of whom included, first of all, Romulus, then Numa Pompilius, then Tullius Hostilius, then Ancus Marcius, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus. Historians do not doubt the existence of the last 3, as there is sufficient evidence to suggest that their reigns did actually happen and were not simply made up in myth, as the first 4 most likely so. Also, according to legend, when Romulus first founded the Senate, it initially consisted of 100 members from 100 different families across the city, a social class that would become known as the patricians, which effectively became the uppermost class in Roman society. The Senate would propose legislation to the King of Rome, which he would either accept or reject at his own discretion. When the king died, that is where the Senate would take action. As mentioned earlier, the Senate would appoint an interrex who held all the powers of the king, but only for 5 days, at which point a new interrex would be appointed by the Senate, and then the cycle would begin over again. I really want to emphasize this, as this was the real time the Senate had a time to shine in the Roman period. The position of interrex, other than holding all powers of the king for 5 days when they were in position, also held other important roles. As mentioned earlier, they were responsible for suggesting new candidates who would potentially become king, and also, of course, had the drawback that they could only do so for 5 days, and this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is because the interrex effectively had the ability to choose the future of the Roman kingdom by appointing the king of their own choice, should the Senate and public assembly approve. Speaking of which, let us go through the process of how the nominee for each monarch was approved. First of all, the intellects would first find a candidate they deemed suitable to become the next king. That candidate would then be placed before the Roman Senate for questioning, debate, and ultimately to see if the Senate would approve. If the candidate got the approval of the Senate, then the candidate would be brought before a public assembly for another vote. The Senate also had a vote on if they believed the candidate was successful as well. If the assembly approved, then the nominee would leave to consult religious officials who would interpret the will of the gods by looking for any signs or omens, which is most likely a formality. The candidate, when approved, would then return to the public assembly to request imperium or military command once they had been approved, and the candidate would then become the new king of Rome. According to the historian Livy, who was writing at a far later date, the first Roman army existed in the 8th century BC and was assumedly made up of the three founding tribes of Rome, the Ramnians, the Tites, and the Lucares, and the first army of Rome itself was made up of 3,000 infantry and 300 horses, 1/3 from each of Rome's tribes. The command system of the Roman army was said to have been as follows. The lowest ranks in the army were the average warriors, who were controlled by the so-called leaders of division, of which there were 6, and who in turn served under a general, who was typically the king. It should be noted that this was the apparent structure of the earliest Roman armies of the kingdom, and that the armies did change somewhat during the kingdom's existence. Some of this information is debated, however, as no contemporary sources from the time period survive, so historians were forced to go off secondary sources, such as Livy, for information about this time period. Unlike today, where most religions worship one god or deity, the Romans had a polytheistic religion, which meant that they served and worshipped multiple gods. There were many gods the Romans worshipped, and here are some examples of them. Zeus, or Jupiter, depending on which country you're in, such as Greece or Rome, Hera or Juno, Poseidon or Neptune, Athena or Minerva, Apollo, Ares or Mars, Hades or Pluto. Now, these aren't all the gods, these are just some examples, but these are the main gods that the Romans and Greeks admittedly worshipped. The most important religious position within the Roman kingdom, who held many powers and rights of religion within the kingdom, was the chief priest of Rome. They held 4 key rights. The right to augur, which was omen spotting using patterns of birds, and no public business could take place without the will of the gods being made known through auspices. He was also often known as the pontifex, or the bridge builder between the men and the gods, and so was held in high regard. The chief priest also had the power to control the Roman calendar and conducted all religious ceremonies and appointed lower religious officers and officers. Romulus, by myth, was the first augur. Important to note, the king of Rome was the chief priest, and so not only was the head of state, but the head of religion within Rome, and so was held religiously in high regard by all below. In the year 509 BCE, the Roman kingdom was no more, and in its place had come the Roman Republic. But how did this happen? Well, the last king of Rome was a man named Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, and his son, Sextus Tarquinius, had a scandalous affair with a woman named Lucretia, who was also the wife of a man named Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, who was also friends with Lucius Junius Brutus, and was a nephew of the king. With the support of the Senate and the army, both Lucius Junius Brutus and Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus would overthrow and exile the king. Eventually, Brutus and Collatinus and the Senate agreed to abolish the monarchy in its entirety and to share executive powers amongst multiple people to prevent monarchs from forming again. Now that the monarchy was gone and replaced with the Republic was founded on 3 main principles: the division of powers, the empowerment of the Senate and people of Rome, and the total abolishment and prevention of any monarchies returning, all of whom, at least initially, were quite successful. The power dynamic of the Republic was also fundamentally different. Instead of a monarch, there were 2 consuls, both of whom were elected for a year and shared power rather than having one person have all the power. This was in theory to prevent monarchies from forming again. However, as you'll find out later, it wasn't that successful in the later periods of the Roman Republic. Additionally, the Senate was enlarged to about 500 members. The size of the Senate did vary throughout the Republic and now held far more responsibilities. Debate and discussion of legislation was now handed to the Senate. The Senate could now vote on certain bills being passed via the consuls and could propose its own form of legislation or motions, and would often advise and debate with the consuls over certain actions and campaigns, and the Senate's approval was now required by law to raise legions to go on a military campaign, which again, in the later periods of the Republic, caused quite some issues. There were also many other positions in the Republican government, but we'll be covering those in a future video. Now hopefully you all understand what you need to know about the Roman Kingdom and how ultimately it became the Roman Republic, which will put you in a good starting position when you come to study this time period. Thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content, and this would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.